Okay, there we go. So yeah, welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn. Today's session is all going to be around building team resilience. So it's something which we hope to do through TED, through that continuous improvement approach. But the key learning points which we're going to be focusing on today is around the practical steps that teams can do and the things they might want to focus on to build team resilience, and also how to foster a team culture that encourages support and trust so that a team can be more resilient. In terms of the objectives, it's around really defining what resilience is, because I think there can be different interpretations of it in different contexts as well. Also identify what are the key features of what makes a resilient team, and I think if we can understand those, we can try and work on those things with teams who perhaps need to build some resilience, or I think especially perhaps newly formed teams or teams who've been through quite a traumatic time or a significant change. I think a lot of teams at the moment are trying to think around how can we build more resilience, and especially when teams might be faced with future change or uncertainty, it becomes more important than ever, and I think that applies to a lot of NHS teams at the moment. And then finally, we're going to look at that through a TED lens and think around, right, how can we use TED to build this in our teams, and which toolkits might be appropriate for that as well. So I'll go into that as we go throughout today. So firstly, thinking about what is resilience. I did a bit of research, looked for what different sort of authors, researchers have said on resilience, and these sorts of things came up. So first one there is that resilience is about being able to overcome the unexpected. So I suppose it's getting through things which might be unforeseen or unexpected. It mentions there about sustainability, is about survival, but resilience is about thriving. So it's much more than just survival, I guess, is where this author is coming from. So it's about being able to, I guess, weather the storm, but also thrive during periods of change or uncertainty. Next one on here suggests that resilience is about maintenance of high levels of positive effect and well-being in the face of adversity. So a little bit of a nod there to, I think, when we think about teams being resilient, it's about protecting our energy levels and our well-being when we know they might be stretched or challenged. Second point there is suggested it's not that resilient individuals never experience a negative effect. So it's not about just being oblivious to negative effects and ignoring them. It's around understanding negative impacts on us and things that can affect us in a negative way, and being able to manage that, or having the strength to, as I say, sort of weather the storm through a period of difficulty. And final one on here is resilience can be a precious skill. People who have it tend to also have these three underlying advantages. So this is more about personal resilience, but I think applies to teams really well. So the 3 points from Amanda Ripley here are that it's about a belief that they can influence life events. So it's around, I guess there's something in there around having the autonomy to be able to make a difference, or to be able to make changes that can help a situation. Second point there is a tendency to find meaningful purpose in life's turmoil. So even when times get tough, having a clearly defined purpose, having I guess, a North Star that guides you through that stormy period. And I think that applies really well to teams, and something that can help build that team resilience. And third point there is about having a conviction that they can learn from both positive and negative experiences. And I think that point about negative experiences is really important, that it's not around, I guess, succumbing to negative experiences and being able to look at them, I guess, objectively, and be able to learn from experiences and think around how can we grow and become better from something which might have been quite traumatic or a challenge for us as an individual or as a team, really. So I think these quotes give us an idea of the sorts of themes that come up when we think about resilience, whether it be in teams or in individuals. But reflecting on those, the sorts of themes that stand out for me were things around these sort of 6 areas. So first off, we've got agility in there. So that might suggest considering how we adapt to changing circumstances. We've also got strength in there. And I think strength is something that people think of quite often when they think of resilience. And I think sometimes if a team or a team leader at sometimes feels that strength is the main factor of resilience, I think that can be dangerous, that it's just about remaining strong. I think, of course, it is important to have that strength, but it's something which can be built on by getting these other things right. And I think that's what I really want to sort of get across today. But definitely strength is part of it. So it's about being strong when times are challenging. Next point on there is around confidence. So from a team perspective, it might be having the confidence that we're on the right path. Or having the confidence that we're equipped to deal with whatever challenges we might be facing. And then the next one's around motivation. So showing that we are committed to our aims, or that we are motivated by our aims as well. So we've got that, again, that strong, clear purpose that really sort of drives us forward, that's at the centre of what we do. And that's definitely something which we try to encourage through TED. Next one is around challenge. So I guess this is that point around thriving thriving when faced with complexity, and maybe thriving with that opportunity to problem solve and work around challenges or issues or problems. So I think that's really important as well. And final one there around change refers to the willingness to accept that change can and will happen, but also that it can be used positively and to our advantage. And I think that's really important when we work in such a changing environment in the NHS. You might have heard the acronym VUCA, which refers, I can't remember every word of the acronym, but it refers to like a volatile, uncertain sort of environment that we operate in. And that is becoming more and more a reality for, I think, many industries, not just in healthcare, but definitely in the NHS. It seems like we're in sort of a wavy ocean where it's one thing after another. There's another sort of challenge externally, or another pressure, or another thing to consider with the way that we work. So NHS teams do have to change quite often in response to those external challenges. And in terms of being resilient, it's around understanding that change is quite often necessary, but also that we can influence that in some ways. There are aspects of change which we can influence, and aspects which we can learn from, which will help future changes as well and future challenges. So I wanted to throw this question out at this point. So why do you feel resilience is important for NHS teams? So maybe thinking about teams that you've worked with, or teams that you see, or things that you see in the media maybe. Any thoughts on that? Why do we feel NHS teams need to be resilient? Yeah, Alan, you mentioned in the chat, lots of change happening. Yeah. Claire, you said because change and adversity is a constant. Yeah, along the same lines there. Ellen again. Oh, that's okay. Yeah, don't worry about having your camera off. Yeah, lots of change happening. Any sort of examples, any sort of specific changes that spring to mind when you're thinking about changes related to any of your organisations?
We were just, myself and Christine were doing TED training this morning. One of the ladies who we were talking to is from the library services at our trust. She was talking about a lot of uncertainty at the moment in terms of NHS England funding for libraries, and I think that's probably true of lots of in lots of instances at the moment, in terms of kind of understanding how working practices are going to be changing, based on obviously different types of funding, but also kind of the changes to potentially job cuts in some cases, things like that. At the moment, I think there's a lot of that going on across lots of ICBs. I think someone's put in the chat, and the trusts in general. So I think one of the biggest things is probably uncertainty at the moment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great point, Megan, there, and yeah, good example of a team that might have that uncertainty on the horizon, and it can feel really difficult to plan sometimes when you don't know what the landscape's going to be like in maybe 12 months time. And I think you mentioned NHS England in there. We know that, you know, the government's plan is to sort of fold up NHS England and merge it with the Department for Health, so that's going to affect all NHS organisations, either directly or indirectly. But there's no sort of clear plan at the moment for how that's going to work, what the timeframes might be, you know, how it's going to affect us at different levels in organisations. And yeah, Helen said in the chat that your ICB is cutting costs, and I think you're definitely not alone in that. I know in the Northwest, where lots of sort of financial cuts and restrictions and savings targets. So that could mean things like redundancies or impact on services or changed ways of working. So there's lots of things externally that are affecting NHS teams. And I think those sorts of examples really highlight why resilience is so important for NHS teams at the moment, because there is so much change happening in different ways, but also that uncertainty. And it can be hard sometimes to have that sort of long-term focus when we don't know what those changes on the horizon are going to be like. So yeah, thanks everyone for sharing. Lots of great stuff coming in there. And I just sort of, for this slide, I sort of screen clipped a few sort of news articles from the last sort of 12, 18 months, and we can see that there's lots of change going on. There's lots, I suppose, things in the media affect the way we think and feel when we come to work in the NHS. It can definitely influence the perspectives of people who know we work in the NHS, or our patients and service users. That can make it difficult at times for NHS teams, but also these things, these types of speculation can lead to that uncertainty and that idea of we don't know what are the right steps to take, or the feeling that we're out of control sometimes. So this sort of backdrop sort of highlights the need for resilience, and it also highlights why it can be challenging at times to be resilient. I've sort of dropped this slide in. This is from my last Lunch and Learn, which was around team resources. And I think this is one which also sort of links to a lot of the things you've been saying in there. When we think about resources, I talked in that last session around how often it's the sort of restrictions in resources, or lack of these different types of resources that are on the left-hand side of this slide, that can impact how we think and feel, or our ability to do our work in NHS teams. And often these are things that are outside of our control. For most teams, these are just facts of life around how we work and that context which we work within. So in that session, I talked around the importance of thinking about the impacts that these things have, and thinking around how we can influence the way these things make us feel, or the way we support each other when we are experiencing things like stress or burnout, or if engagement's going down. How can we start to work on that or address that, acknowledge it? So when we think about those external factors, although we can't influence those ourselves from a team perspective, we can influence how we sort of navigate them. And that comes back to what I was saying on that earlier slide around sort of agility, or being able to embrace change, or understand that change is necessary sometimes because of the climate that we live in and that we work in. So I thought that was still relevant, definitely, to this topic. But having said all that, and acknowledging how tough it can be to be resilient, if we think back to the not too distant future and ask the question, can NHS teams be resilient? Absolutely they can. There's lots of examples, recent examples really, especially when working through the pandemic, where it's shown that NHS teams, even faced with unprecedented challenges, with significant changes, uncertainty, stretched resources, in those situations, NHS teams pulled together and found strength in a common aim and in togetherness. And in many ways, working through the pandemic highlighted the importance of getting things like the basics right, getting those clear objectives right, being able to communicate well, looking out for and valuing each other and celebrating our achievements. I've probably mentioned a few times that I conducted some research in 2021 around the pandemic's impact on team engagement in the NHS. And I was quite amazed when talking to team leaders in different types of teams really across our trust around how they felt actually working through the pandemic had brought them closer in many ways. And I've just pulled out some of the quotes that team leaders said to me. So first one there is that this team felt they developed new ways of communicating which brought them together. And I think this applies to a lot of teams who were finding new ways to structure their team meetings because they couldn't all be in the same room together, or new ways of collaborating and communicating when they might have had to wear masks all the time. So they've had to adapt their approach in some way based with those changes that were, I guess, imposed upon them. Next one there, a team made a point of checking in with each other regularly, which helped us feel more like a team. And I think I saw lots of teams do this more during the pandemic, and I think that was really great that teams recognise that need for that connection. I also think this is one area where the pandemic sort of sharpened people's minds as to the need for this sort of thing. And at the moment, it's not quite as clear that that's what teams need, when actually it is still a really important thing. It can get forgotten sometimes when it's quite not as clear a problem as the pandemic was at the time. Next one, someone said that reflecting on their progress and even small wins made them feel more resilient. So I think that reflects that, being able to celebrate your achievements, celebrate successes, even if they're really small successes, can help to build that strength and that resilience, and can help you feel more equipped to deal with future challenges. Someone else said we all pulled together because we had a common goal, and I suppose in the pandemic it was quite clear, it's like the whole country, the whole world were working towards, okay, we need to get through this, we need to be there for each other, support each other, help each other. And definitely in NHS teams it was a lot about pulling together and having that sort of common goal. And final one I'll put on here, someone said that working through COVID reminded us of the important things. And I think all of these examples show just how resilient NHS teams can be. And I think it is really important that teams do reflect on past experiences like this, because that can help them feel more equipped to deal with future uncertainty. Because at the time, this felt something really huge and something that we couldn't have planned for. There was definitely a lot of uncertainty. If we think back to sort of 2020, 2021, no one really knew how long this would go on for. We never knew what changes would be made next, what different guidance we'd be getting, what different restrictions we might be getting, and what that direction was. But what we did know was that we needed to pull together and we needed to be there for each other. And I found it really encouraging when I spoke to NHS teams going through the pandemic that a lot of teams felt that actually it made them appreciate each other more than they had done, and it made them feel stronger, and that they were there for each other when they were faced with challenges and uncertainty. So when we consider these factors that create team resilience, there's different ways that NHS teams can start to embed them into the team culture. So from a team leader's perspective, it's important to ask the right questions when exploring what's right for my team, what's right for our team. And when we think about these different factors around agility, a team leader might be asking themselves or asking the team, how can we adapt to the changes that are happening to us? How can we adapt to that uncertainty in the future, or how can we be ready to adapt, I guess? In terms of strength, teams might be asking themselves, how can we remain strong when we face difficulties? What are the things we can do in our team to help us remain strong? When we think about confidence, a team leader might be asking, how can we be confident that we will overcome our challenges? So what can we do to help us feel confident? And that might be things like reflecting on past challenges, or thinking around what that future picture might look like once we've overcome the challenge, and being able to sort of project forward to what that might look like. In terms of motivation, a team leader might ask, how can we motivate ourselves to achieve success? How can we keep that engagement up, I guess? How can we stay motivated and keep re-energizing that motivation in the team? And then in terms of challenges, a team leader might be asking, how can we see challenges as growth opportunities? Where are the learning opportunities from the challenges and the changes that we're going through? And in terms of those changes, how can we make changes be positive for us? And what are the positives we can draw from changes that are already happening? So all of those things might be things that are on a team leader's mind. And I would definitely encourage team leaders to think of these questions when they're going into maybe a change that's happening, or they're trying to build resilience through something like TED. And when we look at those different things, there are different strategies that teams can use to try and build this into the team culture. So first off there, we've got good communication. So this helps to build confidence and motivation in teams. It can also help teams be more agile, as they're better able to understand challenges and have the strength to change course when it might be needed. Second point on there is around collaboration. So if we can build good, strong collaboration in our team, it makes the team stronger together, because we become greater than the sum of our parts. But we're also able to change in ways that allow us to overcome challenges. In terms of a positive culture, that helps us to maintain motivation. It helps to build confidence in the team and how we support each other. And then in terms of stress management, in teams, what we can do is help to mitigate the negative impacts of changes or challenges, and we can help to build that strength together so that we are more equipped for whatever changes might happen. In terms of clear goals, these help teams understand their direction, and it helps them not become derailed by external pressures. And it will help to build confidence that you're on the right path as a team. And something we encourage through TED is teams to keep checking back in on that shared purpose and those shared goals, so that you can change and adapt them as it feels right and as is appropriate, and helps you weather those external storms that I mentioned earlier. And final point on there is around reflection and feedback can help build resilience as well. So by doing that, you can ensure teams regularly adapt as situations change. So all of these factors fit into the themes that we've embedded in TED, and all these elements are ways that you can build resilience over time. It's important to note that resilience isn't something which you can just flick a switch and have within the team. It's almost as if it's a muscle that you have to exercise. It's something that you get better at by regularly sort of building on it and contributing to it. So all of these factors are things that can help build that resilience over time. So with that in mind, one of our latest TED toolkits that I wanted to introduce around this topic is a bit of a reframing exercise. There are lots of toolkits in TED that help to build team resilience, but the latest one that I've put in there recently is based on the Getting Things Done approach by a chap called David Allen. And this method is called horizon scanning. So if you go into your TED toolkit and search for horizon, you'll find this resource for teams. And essentially this exercise asks teams to reflect on their work at different levels. So it can work especially well if teams feel stuck on their ground level tasks. So these might be the current actions, the day-to-day things that teams might be doing. And what this activity asks them to do is it gets teams to think first around those day-to-day activities, but then gradually begin to zoom out into what are those wider projects that we might be working on? What are our general areas of responsibility that we have? What are our team goals that we might have as well? We might also look at what is the vision. So what's that future projected vision for us? What might be the vision for the organization as well? And how do we fit into that? And then right at the top there, it asks teams to think about their purpose and principles. So thinking really about that team identity. And going through this type of exercise helps teams to think around, of those current actions that we started off on, which are the things which absolutely align with all those things sort of higher up on our horizon, and which are things which might not align as closely, which we might want to deprioritize against the things which really sort of speak to who we are and who we stand for and really fit in with that shared vision and those goals that we have as a team. So exercises like this can help teams to gain that perspective and also be able to understand what are the important things to be working on. How can we get that balance right for us and our team? So I'd encourage you to have a look at that one. But as I've said, we've lots of resources in TED, and I pulled out 3 of them here. The reality is most of the toolkit resources in TED will align with one of those factors around building resilient teams. But ones I've pulled out are specifically aligned to that. So I've mentioned the horizon scanning exercise, but there is a top tips resource for building team resilience. That's a really good one for team leaders to think around what are the things I can sort of put into the way our team works, or things that I can offer for suggestion for the team. And then number 3 there is the energy and resilience exercise. And this one is more for individuals in a team to reflect on their own energy and resilience and then bring that into a team conversation so that a team can identify what areas of our work stream does energize us and what might actually de-energize us or sap our energy, and where do we need to build that resilience, and where do we need to build that strength and support around how we work. So how can we be there for each other when we know there are tough, challenging aspects of our job role, and how can we make sure that everyone gets that exposure to perhaps the more energizing things, and how can we make sure we do still prioritize some of those things which might seem less important but are really important to energize us and give us the energy to do those more perhaps complex or challenging tasks. So I'll signpost you to those. Please do have a look out for those. But to sort of summarize the sort of main content from today, I think what I really want to get across with this topic is that resilience can be built in all teams, and every team will have resilience to some extent, but it's important to note that it's not something which is just there. You can't just run one exercise and it will be there. It's something that needs to be exercised. And even a team which might be really resilient maybe this year when they do the TED this year, it's not to say that maybe when they come to do TED next year that resilience might have declined if they hadn't worked on it. So it is an important thing to sort of keep in the mind and in the sort of process of how a team works. And final point there is that horizon scanning can help to build perspective. And when we use horizon scanning to maybe look ahead into the future or to zoom out from the day-to-day work, it helps to give us focus on what are the important things for us and our team.